All right. Good evening, LBE community, both here in Flagstaff, throughout the state of Arizona, throughout our country, and throughout anywhere else that people may be listening in with us this evening. It's good to have you back. And it is certainly good to be joined by two of our favorite and most powerful speakers. Every time they come and speak and join us, they bring it in just the way it needs to be brought. So I am very honored to be here tonight with Dr. Mary Rofe and Dr. Tria Allen as we talk about Cowboy Carter, Beyonce, and decolonizing and reclaiming the Black roots of country music. This has been a huge topic ever since the record breaking and just amazing launch of this album that has still only been out for a relatively short amount of time, but has seemingly almost broken the minds of the music industry for some very interesting reasons, which I am sure we will get into tonight. So I would like to offer both our speakers an opportunity to introduce or reintroduce themselves to our audience, and then we will get started with their presentation. Do you want to start, Dr. Rofe?
Sure. Hello, Lived Black Experience family. Dr. Tria and I are definitely frequent flyers at this point. I believe I got started with these community conversations in 2021, so I'm happy to join you this evening again. As Sister Kara said, my name is Dr. Mary Rofe. I am a professor at California State University, Stanislaus, and I am the chair of the Ethnic Studies Department there.
And I'm Dr. Tria Allen. I have the honor of serving in general education here at the University of Arizona and faculty at Pima Community College.
All right. Thank you both. Welcome back. And I will turn the show over to you. If you just want to let me know when to advance your slides, I will handle that on the back end.
Thank you, Sister Kara. So yes, Dr. Tria and I are joining you this evening because of, in I would say, current day social media vernacular, to talk about a viral and really fascinating phenomena of the release of what is actually part two of what is projected to be a three-part album, kind of magnum opus by Beyonce, which was the name that she was given at birth, but her name was incorrectly spelled on her birth certificate. And this is the second act of this 3 album project called Cowboy Carter. And what we're going to be looking into this evening is really doing a deep dive in how Act 2 of Beyonce's project is emblematic of a larger decolonizing project. And what we mean by that is actually reclaiming the Black roots of country music and reclaiming our artistry in terms of Black people and specifically enslaved and descendants of American chattel slavery having created this genre of music as we have created all of the original genres of American music, which this album actually expansively pays homage to. Next slide, please. So, in terms of the conversation this evening, it's really important to frame this in terms of a project of decolonizing the settler colonialist legacy. And I draw from Brandy Waller Pace, who is a scholar who references a really iconic text and seminal text in understanding decolonization by scholars Eve Tuck and K. Wayne Yang, where it's entitled colonization or decolonization is not a metaphor. Now, there's been some critique of this article because it specifically hones in on the rematriation of native lands within a U.S. context, indigenous lands within a south of the border, right, context, and First Nation or lands in reference to Canada. And the issue with this is that the decolonizing project itself as much as rematriation of ancestral native lands that that are unceded, is that it goes beyond, right, rematriation of land. And so Brandy Waller-Page draws from Topji Garba and Sarah Maria Sorrentino's Slavery is a Metaphor. And in particular, I think it is key that she does include the definition of settler colonialism from Eve Tuck and Kay Wayne Yang as being a process and of being both internal and external in terms of the way that it frames racialized hierarchy of everything of value, everything of worth, everything of beauty being created and being maintained by those categorized as white. And what Brandy is arguing in relation to this decolonizing project is that, in fact, the culture, as well as the bodies, as well as the labor, as well as the land, as well as the resources, as well as the artistry, the inventiveness, the genius of BIPOC or Black Indigenous peoples of color has actually been stolen. And it continues to be stolen in the current day. And it reduces kind of the contributions and the actual positioning, in particular of Black Americans, as being exoticized or being peripheral within our own society and in relation to the actual inventions in artistry that we originated, that we created, and that we maintain at the highest of levels. And so, in particular, I want us to focus on the quote from Brandy Waller-Page that characterizes decolonization in her work as learning about the effects of this ongoing structure and process on people, on land, on systems, ideas, education, and what I would say in particular on artistry, on inventions, on genius itself. And not only learning about these effects, but in particular, learning about these effects by listening to the voices of those who are the most marginalized and who are the most targeted by settler colonialist logics, ideologies, and practices. And the key objective here is to disrupt and attempt to repair and reverse this process and these legacies. And the first step to disrupting is actually challenging the master narratives. And so the reason why we're framing the conversation on Beyonce's Cowboy Carter, Act 2 of her 3-album project, is because she has severely disrupted all of the master narratives around country music in particular. Next slide, please. So here, I'm going to invite Dr. Tria to jump in here or to refer back to this slide about the origins of country music itself. And in particular, honing in on the banjo, which is a signature staple instrument of country music that was brought to the U.S. from West Africa by the transatlantic slave trade. So what's important to note here is that part of the settler colonialist logic is that descendants of American chattel slavery are stolen people who had stolen labor extracted on a stolen land. And that in that process of theft, that through that passage, the middle passage across the Atlantic Ocean from primarily the coast of West Africa, that these peoples somehow lost everything, that we lost our language, we lost our religions, we lost our genius, we lost every aspect of our culture and of ourselves. And that simply is not the case. And in fact, not only in all of the original genres of what can be categorized as American music, including the blues, rhythm and blues, rock and roll, and also the kind of foundations of what we know as pop music, we also include country music and part of the actual heritage that was passed over and has been passed down from the Middle Atlantic Passage down through the generations of those descendant from American chattel slavery. And it continues to live on in country music itself. So this is the first part of decolonizing the settler colonialist logic and legacy. It is to inform ourselves, it is to educate ourselves, and to correct the record, and to repair both lies of both omission and of commission. Next slide, please. So we're going to pivot to Beyonce and how Cowboy Carter is a brilliant illustration of what it means to disrupt the settler colonialist logic and narrative, and also to blow it to smithereens. So I was having a conversation with Sister Tria about the talk for this evening. And there's been a lot of buzz and speculation on social media and other kinds of media about why Beyonce chose to release a full country album. And I share with Sister Tria that I believe part of it was personal. Part of it was very personal, according to Beyonce herself. So this is an image of Beyonce at the Country Music Awards in 2016, performing one of her songs, "The Daddy's Gun," from her album Lemonade that was released that year, with the Dixie Chicks, or the Chicks. They took the Dixie out of their group name because it references the antebellum Confederate South. And they had fallen from grace and really been excommunicated by many of their former country music fans because of them speaking out against George W. Bush when he launched the war against Iraq in 2003. And this caused them to fall from grace with a lot of country fans who were largely understood and characterized as being white, Southern, very conservative, neoconservative, and very white supremacist, also promoting U.S. imperial, neo-imperialist wars abroad, as well as kind of practices and policies such as a hyper militarized police state domestically at home. And so Beyonce was appearing and performing Daddy's Gun at this Country Music Awards event. And I'm not sure what reception she thought she was going to get when she performed this song on stage. I actually went back and watched video footage of this performance. And we'll get into the reception that she actually received. Based on this experience, Beyonce shared earlier, just not too long ago, a little bit over a month ago, with the New York Times, that her releasing of Cowboy Carter was born out of an experience that she had years ago where she did not feel welcomed. And it was made very clear to her that she wasn't. And because of this experience, she did a deeper dive into the history of country music and studied our rich musical archive. Emphasis on our, because she's talking about Black Americans' rich musical archive. So what Beyonce is describing here is the first step in decolonizing the settler colonialist logic. This is the first step to decolonizing our minds through knowledge, through reclaiming our actual heritage. Next slide, please. So I take issue with this article. This was printed recently in The Nation. So I've highlighted some text in red that I'm challenging, right? We can critically engage with any form of information, also to disrupt this ongoing narrative, master narrative, pun intended, in order to keep our minds colonized. And so Beyonce, to me, was very restrained and very diplomatic in what she shared with the New York Times about feeling unwelcome. The reception that she got at this award show was far beyond that. Now, I'm not sure why the Nation chose the word outlaw to use in reference to Beyonce. I think it's very interesting. Sister Tria is going to get into this notion of gatekeeping and policing as an ongoing part of the white supremacist settler colonialist project, especially in relation to anti-Blackness itself. But when she performed at the Country Music Award show in Nashville, the audience was lily white. First of all, when it says the city's music elite, translate to lily white. And what lily white means is when I watched the video of her performance and it panned to the audience members, they were all white. I didn't see a brown or beige, or they were exclusively white. And this is the musical elite. And I would say in country music, it's very interesting that is a genre that is especially policed when it comes to white supremacy in comparison to other kind of mainstream musical genres. And it says that the audience scorned her. Now, in this article, it says, though she honored their traditions, I corrected that. That is a lie. That is a lie by commission. It's our traditions. African Americans created country music. So, and it's our traditions in the sense that, I mean, if you want to include thieves in the R, you can. I don't. It's our tradition. It's not theirs. The content, the lyrical content of the song that she chose praised her father and also paid tribute to the Second Amendment. Now, those of you who may not be familiar with the U.S. Constitution or may have, kind of forgotten, the Second Amendment is the amendment that gives the right to bear arms. So you can't, in terms of the lyrical content, Daddy's gun, I mean, it's absolutely catering to this crowd. It's catering to the fan base of current day country music. So there's nothing to dispute, or there was nothing that was shaking the table or controversial about the lyrical content of the song that she chose to perform. But despite that, not only was she not welcomed, there were a number of attendees who got up and walked out of the theater while she was performing. And I've been going down the rabbit hole of Cowboy Carter for a while now, ever since it was released, and listening to a lot of the songs. And I also found an article, and this person was quoted in the Nation's article here, an individual who was in attendance that evening when she performed said that he overheard a white woman saying, "Get that black bee off the stage." So this goes far beyond being made to feel unwelcomed. I mean, this is hostile enemy territory. And based on Beyonce's own words, I think that this became personal for her. And I would hazard a guess. I would speculate that the fact that this made such an impression on Beyonce and the way that she has so epically clapped back with Cowboy Carter and taken back this whole genre of music is that maybe because of her fame, because of her wealth, because of her status, even because of her Creole, light skins, good hair, right, fine featured phenotype, maybe she thought that that was going to buffer her or exempt her from the full onslaught of anti-Blackness that was deployed against her. And I think what she learned on this night, to the benefit of all of us and to her bottom line and to country music, right? And to Black artists that have been in country music their entire careers, who she also showcases on Cowboy Carter. I think that she got a huge reality check that at the end of the day, it is absolutely incumbent upon white supremacist, anti-Black, settler colonialism to uphold itself by reducing any melanated person of African descent to the status of a Black bee. This was not an isolated incident. This should not be shocking in any way. This is precisely the space where it's guaranteed, right, that this would have been the reception because of upholding settler colonialism and white supremacy itself. Now, I'm not sure if this was Beyonce's thought process. I'm not sure exactly what reception she thought she was going to get within this framework. I'm simply disrupting part of the narrative of the pull yourself up by the bootstraps myth of American meritocracy, that somehow we can socially whiten ourselves by our status, by our wealth, by our work, by our talent, by our genius, and we cannot. We can attain obviously a certain level of privilege, for sure, yes. But at the end of the day, if you push hard enough against the parameters and you shake the table hard enough, simply by being Black and by being excellent, you're going to be put in your place. You're going to be put in your place. And Beyonce was put in her place that night. And ever since then, she's been plotting and scheming in the studio on responding with an unapologetic, definitive, you cannot put me in my place, because my place is on the throne up here. And I'm going to take over the whole genre, which was ours to begin with. So it's really a reclamation. So next slide, please. I'm going to turn it over to Sister Tria.
So that conversation kind of like begs the question of, what are the underpinnings? Where did this idea of country music start? And so we down the rabbit hole again, a lot of research. I actually just want to start really quickly with this quote from Dr. Stephen Lewis, who is the curator of music at the National Museum for African American History and Culture, who says that describing this African American influence on country music in all its glory, or just in American music, period, excuse me. So it's describing African-American or Black influences on American music in all of its glory is one, intimidating, and it is a laborious task. And that is because you cannot separate the two. What we call American popular music, what we call jazz, what we call blues, what we call R&B, all of these things originate in West and Central Africa. And so that's very hard for people to understand until you understand that the first family of country music are the Carter family. And what's really interesting about the Carter family is that they kind of develop through the Bristol sessions in Bristol, Tennessee, this famous picking method and these songs. But what's less known about them is that the reason why they're able to kind of produce those things is because of a Black blues and folklore folk singer guitarist named Leslie Isley Riddle. And so essentially, I'm going to just paraphrase here. AP Carter was like, hey, can you take us into Black spaces that we can't get into and teach us the songs? And can you teach us the harmonies and how to play that music? And then that music was then transposed and recorded by the Carter family. I'm simplifying this, so go do your research. And then that music was then taken and then recorded. And why this is so important that we kind of mention this is because what is washed out of any recognition of country music or its underpinnings is Leslie Riddle, right? So if you go and you look at the Country Music Hall of Fame, and y'all knew I had time this week, me and my petty self, and you say, okay, well, who's in the Country Music Hall of Fame? The Carter family is, but a more important question is who is not in the Country Hall Music of Fame? And the answer is Leslie Riddle and some of these other country artists that we know of that you never hear about. Even Linda Martell, who Beyonce references, who was the first woman to, I believe, perform solo at the Opry, was not even included in the Country Hall Music Fame. As a matter of fact, there are only three Black people, let me just say three Black people who we believe identified as male: Deford Bailey, Ray Charles, and Charley Pride. And Charley Pride was extremely significant considering he is one of the few Black stars who had a superstar country genre like experience, him and Darius Rucker, right? So the other interesting thing about just kind of combing through this archive of who is included in the Country Music Hall of Fame is when these three Black individuals were inducted: 2005, 2000, and 2021. So even just the recognition of just some of the folks, and Ray Charles didn't do a lot of country, but enough to kind of be recognized. They're not even recognized until the 21st century, nor are any of the people who came before them who made those things possible. So some of your favorite artists who have these unique plucking styles that stem from banjo and West African lute playing that are then taught to some of these country stars, and specifically the Carter family, they never get mentioned at all. Some of the harmonies, some of the ways that we play instruments, all of these key markers that are important for us to understand the roots of country are kind of washed away when we think about this first family of country. The other really interesting part about this is, so we're in the 20s, and prior to that, we had some really horrific, I don't even know what to call them except for massacres, where you had just shortly after the Civil War, right after we've overturned Reconstruction, we have the 19th century, the bottom of the 19th century, where we are literally terrorizing Black folks out of the state of Tennessee. As a matter of fact, one of the first Black anthropologists, Ida B. Wells, also first Black journalist, her friend, the Moss and two other Black men are murdered. They basically are murdered for being too ambitious and too successful Moss's last words when he's getting ready to be murdered is like, is there anything that you want to tell Black people? And he essentially says, tell my people to go west. There is no place for them here. Right. But in running all the Black folks out, what that kind of does for this colonizing like ideology is to kind of erase, like to literally erase Black people from the state of Tennessee, but also erase all mention of their contributions to any part of that society. So if we're like, well, I mean, that was the bottom of the 19th, early 20th century, we forget that country music finds its preeminence in the 20s, in the early part of the 20th century. And because of this, we're seeing like just erasure still happen even beyond the 21st century. The fact that we have all of these individuals who kind of help make country music what it is, in any genre of music what it is in America, and several musicologists making note of country music is not one type of music. It is kind of like this hybridization of European, West African, and indigenous music. Certain instruments, the drum, y'all, the drum, string instruments, and not just the kind you play with the bowl, being brought into this genre, work songs, Negro spirituals. All of these are part of what we call country. And all of these, if we're thinking about Americana as just a music genre, if you take away the contributions of Black people, it is erased. It does not exist at all. And so that leads us to the question of, next slide, please, who gets to be considered country, right? And so we have various examples. Lil Nas X comes out with Old Town Road, and he is kicked off the country charts because he is not country. But that song then becomes legitimized when we get a Billy Ray Cyrus who jumps on this single. And then I believe my good sis was telling me a story about how she went home and it was like, congratulations, Billy Ray Cyrus, on your number 1 country hit. When the whole ideology behind the song, like all of the song was imagined by this queer person, of black person, and they don't fit the genre of music. Whitney Houston, who does "I Will Always Love You," which has become an iconic song. That's actually Dolly Parton's song. And Dolly Parton like makes mention of how when Whitney sang that song, it actually brought the song to life. And so if you listen to like Dolly Parton's version of the song versus Whitney's version of the song at its genesis is country. But does Whitney Houston get credited with being a country music star? And you don't see that. "I Will Always Love You," also imagined as country as well. Whitney Houston sings it. Then you have, country artists who are out here, Black country artists like Tanner Adele, who is down here, who also performs on the album Cowboy Carter. And because of her presence on Cowboy Carter, her songs, shoot up through the roof, but she is never acknowledged as a country musician. She's always acknowledged as an American songwriter, even though the genre that she has primarily written songs for is country. And please don't let me get started about all of the musicians and the music writers, like Candy from, Escape, who writes for so many individuals who can never be counted as a country artist, who is always an American songwriter. And then, of course, we get to the first Black woman who wins Country Song of the Year, not because she sang it, but because someone legitimizes a song that was born in like the 80s. I believe it was Fast Car, as a country song. And then that country song is then acknowledged as Luke, forgive me, I don't know your name, but a breakout performance of Fast Car by Luke. And the upcry was, this is Tracy Chapman's song. We're not going to give Tracy Chapman their due at all. So this idea of who gets to be country, even though country is not, it has never been one genre, and most of those genres, including church songs, which we now know is gospel, work songs, which we know was done like on chain gangs and in the fields, beat patterns, picking patterns that we know. Even the banjo and the evolution of the banjo from the West African lute, drum patterns, even though we know that these are foundationally African to their core, there is something about this idea of we cannot give you credit, we need to erase you, because if we acknowledge that country music is not this great representation of the great United States of America, but really is an amalgamation centered in very Black-bodied countries, then we have to admit this whole facade is a lie. Right? So next slide, please. And I'm going to ask Dr. Rope to jump in here on this next slide.
Yeah, thank you, Sister Tria. So this is Beyonce's triumphant response to a very disappointing and denigrating and unsurprising experience at those Country Music Awards. Now, I think it is interesting that it took an artist of Beyonce's caliber to be the first Black woman, to have a #1 hit, Texas Hold'em, on the country Billboard charts. Also, and what's very interesting is I just learned last night that Texas Hold'em, which was like released kind of co-consecutively with 16 Carriages, was only knocked off of the #1 spot on the country charts by another Black country singer called Shabuzi, and he actually did a remake of a hit kind of a R&B/rap song from the early 2000s called Everybody in the Club Getting Tipsy. So that's the current, and it's just called Tipsy, but that's the current #1 song on the country Billboard charts. And also, this is basically kind of an infographic of Beyonce's triumphant reclamation of country music through, and also how the album is charting on the Americana folk chart. And I think this last kind of data piece is really important based on what Sister Tria just said, that the origins and the roots and the foundations and really certain genres, whole cloth, such as jazz, such as rhythm and blues, such as rock and roll, those were all right. African American and really diasporic African creations. And so even with this chart, which is the Americana, I mean, what is Americana folk/folk? What is that? It's like in part or in whole, these are genres and art forms that originate with Black Americans and with the actual African practices and traditions and artistry that were shipped across the Atlantic along with the people. So it's a really brilliant, stellar way of disrupting the settler, not only disrupting the settler colonialist logic, but also successfully decolonizing, to the point where all over social media, I'm seeing all of actually Black and white folks, because it took both to make this album and to make the Texas Hold'em song such a resounding success, but wearing the cowboy hats and the boots and doing the dance. There's a viral dance to Texas Hold'em. Now, what I want to say is this also brings up the whole notion of the title Cowboy Carter itself. And so cowboy actually harkens back to the erasure of the fact that there were many Black men, specifically in Texas, when it was a colony and later on when it was a state, who were hands on ranches and working with horses and cattle. And they were actually called cowboy because Black men of any age were not called men, they were called boys. So when the to denote, right, to denote anti-blackness and white supremacy and to position them as less than white men. In the deep south, the term was boy. Come over here, boy, get to work, boy. But you take that and you transliterate that to a Texas or a Southwestern context on ranches, and it becomes cowboy. And what's ironic is that now, throughout the 20th and now the 21st century, is that cowboy is the term that universally not only designates a certain type of man, but it also is specifically and exclusively applied to white men. I mean, it completely erases the history of actually both Black and Mexican kind of men and how they were involved in cattle ranches in the Southwest and in Texas. The other reason the title itself is such a master class in decolonizing the rhetoric is that, as I was sharing with Sister Tria earlier, Beyonce chose Carter, I believe, more so to call attention and to set the record straight on the colonizing Carter family that has gone down in history up until now as being heralded as the first family of country music itself, of popular country music. And it just so happens, ironically, that we know that Beyonce's married name is Carter, Mrs. Carter, because her husband's last name is Carter. So there's multiple meanings and multiple significations in the title of the album itself that is brilliant. And again, it not only disrupts, but it also repairs that settler colonialist colonizing, right? That project. Next slide. And Sister Tria, I'll pause here to see if you want to add anything else.
No, the only other thing I wanted to add is like just some of the backlash from this album, I think happens because if you have never had to grapple with your history in ways that marginalized communities have to grapple with everyone's history and their approximation to everyone, then it becomes almost threatening to how we have built this kind of Americana identity. What do I mean by that? So cowboy, we know, like if you know your history, was a derogatory term, as Dr. Rofe was saying. It's a derogatory term to marginalized agricultural workers in the Southwest who primarily worked with cattle, right? Those bodies were typically Black and brown and indigenous, period. But somewhere along like the early 20th century, cowboy then became like this demarcation for masculinity, white masculinity, in ways that like Roosevelt, the president, spent a lot of his time in North Carolina with a cowboy hat, and not North Carolina, excuse me, North Dakota, out in the wild, cultivating the wild so that he could be seen as this robust leader. And then, so like this imagining of white masculinity from the context of cowboy, or to be a cowboy, it even goes a step further when the cowboy becomes the savior of the American identity in this cowboys and Indians sort of thing, where we are like trying to like save our country from the savages, right? So to use a phrase like this not only disrupts like folks who have never heard their history, but it also brings out trolls who will fight to like really protect falsehoods as their history. One such instance we've just seen is the student from Indiana State University, basically saying that Black people aren't country. They were in the country. They were in the country, but they weren't making money. They were picking cotton and being sold for money, which completely, even then, I'm like, oh, you're so close, sweetie. But literally, Black bodies were the economic source for your ability to be here in this moment. So without saying those things, this attack on, well, she can't be country, while also not recognizing that she's from Texas, which we count as country, right? So even with the twang and the guitar picking and the just approximation to the South and the blues, there are so many things that we kind of miss in our unwillingness to kind of like confront our history in ways that are truthful and honest, that we maybe have never ever had to do before. And so that has been interesting when we talk about decolonization, right? This really examining and pulling down and unlearning our assumptions, because all we have been taught are the erased spaces that we fill in. I like to say it this way: the brain, the reason why a first-hand witness is not a really good witness is because the brain fills in facts. And so if you erase people from our histories, then your brain will fill in those erasures with, well, it must have been the first family, the Carters. The Carters was the first family of country. And it allows you to say those things and completely never interrogate that assumption. And that is the importance of it, because to sit here and call this woman who works very hard, regardless of her flaws, because we all have them, who works very hard on her craft, who had kind of this awakening, right? Because, you know, it's possible for you to feed into that narrative as well, because she goes down the annals of Black music history. And she's like, oh, hold on, I'm not out of pocket. I do belong here, even if they don't make me feel like I belong here. So I do also want to just say that there is this kind of, in this reclamation of Black musical history and support and technology and, you know, just techniques, musicality, there is a movement called the Black Opry that was started in 2022. And I believe that there will be a link in the chat somewhere. But essentially, this young lady in Nashville, Tennessee was like, I just love it. There's so many artists who are around here who are doing it, and we don't have a place that supports us. So it started in 2022 as this kind of online collective. And so they call themselves, if they go out and they tour, they call themselves the Black Opry Review. What is so amazing about that? It brings to mind the Chitlin Circuit, when people would not give Black artists a chance, right? So we don't want your Black bodies, but we do want your genius. So hand us those songs and we're going to find a 4-man group, white man group, who will then redo that song, and then it'll become a hit, right? It brings to mind the Chitlin Circuit, whereas if you all will not make space, or you will not recognize the erasure, we will create our own space and educate ourselves and others about our contributions to this genre. So that's all I have to say about that.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I love it. So much is coming to mind. And, you know, when you were talking about describing the Chitlin circuit, I also think about the first really massive popular form of entertainment in the US. By 1840, the mid 19th century, it was minstrel shows. And these were shows that consisted of white men in blackface. And it was obviously prior to the Civil War. So chattel slavery was still in full force in the US at that time. And these were shows that did tours all over the country. I mean, and primarily in the South, that actually made fun of enslaved peoples of African descent, made fun of the way that we looked in these very caricatured, exaggerated, and also very stereotypical ways that primarily were perpetuating stereotypes of enslaved peoples as being childlike because they were of subhuman intelligence, of being very simple minded in terms of not having the intellectual acumen, of liking to dance and kind of sing and be lazy and needing the care of paternalistic white enslavers and plantation owners. And they also were using the instruments such as the banjo, and what I would say is also kind of a dissemination and an early precursor and foreshadowing of the status that country music and Americana and like folk music would achieve through these minstrel shows that were so popular. And they became so popular that they ended up transitioning by the late 19th century into even Black actors and Black performers being a part of this circuit, and then they were also wearing blackface. And literally, this becomes the most popular form of entertainment in the U.S., and it's based on caricatures and stereotypes. The white audiences, because they played exclusively to white audiences. This was not a part of the Chitlin circuit. And what's especially ironic is that Jim Crow was a fictitious character who became popular on this minstrel show circuit. And that eventually became the name of nearly 100 years of obviously the apartheid system throughout the country, especially intensive in the South, known as Jim Crow segregation. And so it's the rabbit hole goes so deep when it comes to this. And I think it's really interesting because I really think that in the starting in 1840 forward, this is where we get the first kind of more wide scale popularization and colonization and demonization of black art and black music, and in particular country music. I pulled up this image of Beyonce because we're going to get into images, and that images or a photo or an image speaks more than, it's worth 1,000 words or more. And all of the different ways that the images that Beyonce released with this album have been subject to raging debate, criticism, and speculation about what do these images mean. So this gives me a chance. I love this talk, our conversation tonight, Sister Tria, because I get into my ethnic studies bag and I get into my anthropology bag with looking at semiotics, the meaning of symbols and the reality of symbols. And the reality is there usually are almost always multiple meanings. I do want to call attention to this quote. This ain't a country album. I have also been watching some clips of interviews with Beyonce, and even from the past, saying that she's artists and artistry itself defies genres. It defies being codified and constrained within a category, within a box. And the reason why the experience in 2016 at the award show resonated with her is because I'm an artist, and this is a part of my repertoire of how I create art. And I cannot be confined or reduced to any one particular type or genre of music, specifically because I'm Black. And I have listened to a number of the songs on this album, and I will tell you that this album is not exclusively a country album, even with the kinds of music and the kinds of songs. There are 26 songs on this album. And what she's doing on this album is paying homage to historic and contemporary music that originates in Black American culture and that is created through Black American artistry itself. So literally, this goes far beyond a country album. Next slide, please. And yet, these are the images. One is the front cover of the album. I believe one is the back cover. And so we're going to close out very shortly with looking at a part of the decolonizing project is not simply disrupting the master narratives. And what I love about what you said, Sister Tria, about trolls coming out and doubling down on their fictitious fantasy versions of revisionist history, is that facts don't care about feelings. Facts do not care about anybody's feelings. And the truth stands on its own. It stands on its own. And it's not so much a part of defending the truth as it is about disseminating the truth, calling awareness to the truth. And that in and of itself, in a nutshell, is decolonizing, period. Truth is the ultimate antidote to all of this. And when we talk about disrupting the narrative, again, we're not simply talking about words or language. We're talking about images. We're talking about symbols. We're talking about all of the different meanings. For example, now I think that the flag may be the flag of, I don't know if this is an American flag or of Texas. Remember, after the Alamo and, the Texas being wrested from Mexico, indigenous folks and the Comanche in particular, that was decades of very vicious, very bloody guerrilla warfare, right, to get the Comanche out of Texas. But Texas was a republic, right? It was its own country for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
And so this could be, I don't know, I didn't get the full, but looking at even, for example, if we think about the American flag, all of the different meanings assigned to that symbol. For me, the meanings that I ascribe to the American flag, right, it's very different from the meanings that others, and even my grandfather, who had an American flag in front of the house every single day. So I wanted to show these two images to show that unsettling the semiotics, the images, how unsettling these images are, how unsettling these images have been for everyone, including not only white folks, but also Black folks and diehard Beyonce fans, right? Members of the Beehive. And then how the juxtaposition, she chose to include both of these images as part of the album art. And the one, she has the sash with the name Act 2, Beyonce. And I, up until the release of Cowboy Carter, I never knew that Beyonce's name was Beyonce, but that when her parents shared that name, it was inaccurately recorded on her birth certificate as Beyonce. And it harkens back to, again, peoples of African descent being stripped of our names. And even in South Africa, when I went to South Africa, indigenous South Africans, Black South Africans, calling the Europeanized names that were given to them in place of their actual indigenous names because they were too difficult to pronounce, they call those names slave names. So there's multiple layers just to this one project, and there's multiple meanings encapsulated and conveyed in these images. And all of this, right? All of this has completely upended the colonialist narrative. So I'll pause there to see if you have anything else to share about this.
Okay, there's so many things. So this first image here, Act 2, Beyonce, I want to first honor that Faith Ringgold is now an ancestor and passed. If it wasn't last week, it was the week before. But there was this image in Faith Ringgold's book, and I can't remember what the book was called, but I think the image was called "We Came to America," right? And so it's this Black lady liberty. And so here we have Beyonce standing in what our colonized mind would call Bo Derek braids, but we know better, in the same format as Lady Liberty, right? And so if anybody knows about Americana iconography, Lady Liberty is the story that we like to tell about how people came through Ellis Island and it was a melting pot. But nobody knows that Lady Liberty, at the bottom of that statue, there are chains on Lady Liberty's feet. And that is because the artist was making a statement about the unconstitutional nature of enslavement, right? It also brings to mind the image, Faith Ringgold's We Came to America, but also this idea of beauty queen, right? What is considered beautiful? And so here we have this Black body that's wrapped in this banner that's telling us Act 2. Huge like pieces here about what it means to be a Black woman and then have the liberty to do things in a country and be unfettered to be able to do those things. But then also this other image of Beyonce as kind of like one author put, her name is Candace, she writes for Vox, Constance is her name. Constance Grady talks about, like, in all of other Beyonce's albums, she has been the Christian Virgin Mary, the Roman Venus, the goddess Oshun. And in Renaissance, she was like a disco queen, creating safe spaces for Black queer folks. But here she has gone from being an American goddess to the goddess of America. Because there's so much here when you think about dictator pictures or leader pictures. George Washington, who used to pose with his horse in the American flag, or what was then the American flag. Also, Napoleon and his kind of like asserting dominance. Well, here we have all of the things that kind of like make you the queen. The red, white, and blue. It's also very reminiscent of rodeo queens as well, which you would find in Texas, right? But there's also something very important about this horse. This horse is called a Lipzinger. And what's really interesting is these horses start off as Black and brown. And over time, they turn gray or white. And so the image of using a white Lipzinger horse is like also talking about how we kind of whitewash country as a genre, but then also whitewash the history of what it meant to be a cowboy in America, what it means to actually be Americana and how it has been whitewashed. And so you can like look at just looking at the images that are being positioned here, we're really butting up against the normalcy of this is what it means to be American. This is what it means to be patriotic. This is what it means to represent where I'm from or what country is. Because country, in a lot of ways, some of the uproar is, how dare you take our American iconography and state that it has Black underpinnings? Because if we agree to this, then we have to agree that this country was built by Black and brown people. But we don't have time for that conversation. Yeah, what do you think?
I think this is a great stopping point. We could keep going down the rabbit hole. Even thinking about American Requiem, which is one of the songs and the lyrics of that song, which is this really interesting and bittersweet and very incisive. I'm gonna opening lyrics from American on the US, on the American dream, and especially on what is considered patriotic, what is considered quintessentially American, as in what you were just sharing, really helps me got me down that rabbit hole of American Requiem, which is another song from the album that's getting a lot of attention. And what a content creator on YouTube who I love, he researches, and he gave an analysis of Cowboy Carter, and he talks about the opening lyrics from American Requiem are really the objective, Beyonce's objective for this project, is that nothing really is for things to stay the same. They have to change again. Hello, my old friend. You change your name, but not the ways you play pretend. American Requiem. Them big ideas, yeah, are buried here. Yeah, amen. And it literally sounds like a hybrid of opera with a soaring Negro spiritual, right? So she's really going in. She's really going in with this project. And the catalyst, to me, harkening back to one of her previous projects, was a lemon, very sour experience that she absolutely alchemically transmuted into lemonade. So I think I'm going to stop there.
Yes.
I'm going to stop there.
Because we can absolutely go on
and on and on. Yeah, like this album, like the playlist. Yeah.
All right, Miss Kara. Although, can I just say this one thing? I find it absolutely refreshing that as this is not necessarily about Beyonce, but as you are doing the work to reclaim who you are, it is okay for you to experiment. And I think we see this with her, to experiment on what that means. Because if you have been locked out from your history and you don't know these things, like it's really okay. Even if you're like, well, I'm 64, I'm blah, 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 blah. It's okay for you to experiment and know and figure out who you are after reclaiming that, after doing the work of unlearning the assumptions that you've labored under. Because Beyonce didn't even know this until 2016 when she's like, oh, I wasn't wanted there. And I was like, why? And we can go over that in another episode. But this idea of like, oh, I went and found out Arturo Schomburg said, Black people need to dig up their past. And digging up our past will allow us to do the work that slavery and other oppressions have taken from us.
Yeah, it reminds me of Clara Estes' book, Women Who Run with the Wolves, and referencing it's an indigenous kind of story about the bone woman. And the bone woman is the woman who sings the flesh back onto the bones. And so when I think about excavation, I think about it more in this deeply spiritual and also literal sense. Mm-hmm. That is also predates. I mean, I don't want to frame it in terms of archaeology or excavation, but it's not about digging up bones. It's about singing the flesh, reclaiming and healing the flesh back onto our collective and individual bodies and minds and spirits, really.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. It's amazingly grounding. It's like you cannot be moved. We cannot be moved. Like I said, truth and facts don't care about anybody's feelings.
So I do see, Sister Mary, that we do have questions.
Okay.
So one of the questions was, why is it that Darius Rucker was not treated the same as Beyonce? That's a question that somebody has. Like, why do we believe he wasn't? And Darius Rucker was with Hootie and the Blowfish.
Hootie and the Blowfish. So he had already acquired fame as the only Black member of a band that was it was like a kind of more acoustic-y, guitar-y rock.
Mm-hmm.
Thing about Darius Rucker to me, because I was an undergraduate student, he was completely whitewashed to me. Like all of the videos, all of the women who were like everyone in the videos were always depicted as white. All of the love interests were white women, and at that time, I mean, you had groups like Public Enemy that had huge mainstream success. So I think because he initially built his platform in a way like Hootie and the Blowfish were not Destiny's Child. They were not. And I think in some ways in the music industry, actually, it's incredibly patriarchal. So I think the fact that he was a Black man and that he was very whitewashed. I always saw him as being very whitewashed. So I think all of that.
Who is the professor? Oh my gosh. Dr. Guthrie, don't text me after this. Molefe Asante said that when we talk about African phenomenon from an Afrocentric perspective, meaning that the African experience is the expertise,
Mm-hmm.
that even though we think Ruha Benjamin just said black faces in high places will not save us, right?
Nope.
She just said
that
that.
part.
So the thing here, that the connection that I want to make is this, is that just because you're a Black person in a high space or you've gotten acclaim does not mean that you're doing that from an Afrocentric lens or
Right.
you are centering the Black experience. So I want to say, yes, patriarchy, but I think that there's also a misogynoir that's happening with Beyonce, whether we believe that or not, that because she chooses to uplift and specifically uplift Black women in a way that does not make them catharsis for general society, meaning she's a hoe, she's a baby mama,
Or she's a mammy.
right? She's a welfare queen. All of those things, because she is not doing that, and because her Blackness is displayed in such a way that centers the uplifting of Blackness in a way that doesn't make it catharsis for the general society. I think that's why. And because she doesn't sell that Blackness off in parts, because it's crazy to me to consider. I remember these videos of Darius Rucker and how he kind of like, I don't remember there being a pretty dark-skinned Black girl, and I say it that way specifically. There was no pretty dark-skinned Black girl that was a love interest in any of the videos that I can remember.
I don't remember him having any Black women or even women of color in his videos. The main hits, they were always white women.
And see, that's my point.
And that's a semiotic. That's a
100%.
clear, like, yo.
Because you're still upholding the narrative of like whiteness and white womanhood being the epitome of purity and womanhood in ways that Beyonce is like, I'm gonna rock this with my curves and my stretch marks in ways that folks may or may not get down, because everyone wants Black parts, but they don't want the Black psyche.
They want the rhythm and none of the blues.
Exactly.
But the problem is, the rhythm comes from
the blues.
Those kinds of dark night of the soul experiences.
Yeah.
It draws up like that. It literally is the prima materia for alchemy.
Yes.
And you can't get it otherwise. And so, I mean, they can pretend and try, but it's very clear to me. It's not giving. It's like that tepid remake of Tracy Chapman's song, and why that song was awarded Country Song of the Year, I don't know. I specifically, when I learned that there was this remake and everybody was raving about it, I listened to it. I didn't even get through the whole thing. I'm like, are you kidding me? This sounds like the equivalent of potato salad with mayonnaise and walnuts and cranberries and trying to
No.
come to the cookout with no hot sauce.
I have a better analogy. It is the equivalent of Taylor Swift doing Earth,
Earth,
Wind, and
Wind, and
Fire
Fire.
September.
Baby, don't get me on that don't get me started on her, please.
Okay, I'm done. Go ahead, Kara.
I'm going to come in with my first question on that point, though. Just the, I think, somewhat manufactured conflict between Taylor Swift and Beyonce, or Beyonce. I really kind of hope that she reclaims that name professionally and uses that. But I find it so interesting that in the ongoing conversation about these albums, there is almost a refusal to acknowledge the fact that when Beyonce's album came out, there were countless articles that were talking about, deconstructing the lyrics, talking about the album cover, talking about the history it was making as it rose through the charts pretty much overnight, all of those things. And then seemingly, or at least by surface level appearances, in response, Taylor Swift drops 2 albums back to back, both of which were received very coolly, both called pretty immediately mediocre and not really the expected music from her. But then the coverage has kind of trickled off, and you start hearing things about the symbolism of the cover or different things like that, but not actually talking about the music, where the conversation about Beyonce's album continues, but it's still centering not about the mastery or the genius behind it, but about her alleged attempt to interlope into country music. So why is it that the focus is so much on Beyonce not deserving the credit or the praise that she's received for her album, and with Taylor Swift's albums, the response is, we're not going to say this because it would be, we're just not going to talk about it at all because anything we'd have to say would probably be considered mean.
I mean, first, I want to say really quickly that it's a continuation or an extension of the same dynamic of why Beyonce does not get recognized for Album of the Year. The first time when she was nominated for Lemonade against Adele, well, Adele won the award. Then for Renaissance last year, Harry Styles, Adele and Harry Styles are not from the US. So let's talk about patriotism versus white supremacy and anti-Blackness. Sister Tree and I were talking about this also in terms of the US doesn't care anything about immigration or patriotism as long as the folks being recognized and accoladed are white and they uphold white supremacy. And so I don't know that, again, it's going back to Massadra Noor, looking at intersectionality of race and gender. I think it's too galling for many, many sectors of American society to fully recognize Black women. I mean, and it doesn't matter how much, how much merit goes into it, how much brilliance and genius goes into it. And it gets to the point where, in a sense, I love what Sister Tria was saying about Lady Liberty, where we're doing this on behalf of ourselves. We're not doing this to try to beg or plead for some crumbs from the table of less than mediocre, subpar white supremacy. The flip side of this, quite frankly, because I listened to reviews of the latest release by Taylor Swift, and the album is still making all of this money and clocking all of these numbers, she's literally become, and I'm not saying that she's chosen this. I'm not saying that this is her intent or it's by design. She is literally the poster child emblem of white supremacy at this point. She is. I mean, there was an article that said that she's the reigning queen of alt-right, white supremacist groups, and that's not her fault. And she's coasting, she's skating, because it's right. They don't. That's the whole project in a nutshell. The whole project of settler colonialism and white supremacy is to sit up on the wraparound veranda porch on the big house on the plantation and to sit in those rocking chairs and to sip the mint julep drink while a couple of enslaved people wave those big old palmetto frond, those palmetto leaf fans. The whole point is not to work. Mm-hmm. The whole point is not to exert. The whole point is to pillage and plunder and steal and take all the credit and get all the awards. And it's to a point where, quite frankly, I'm a Beyonce. Why you keep going to these white award shows? Why do you want to be awarded and recognized by them? I don't. I know I'm doing something right when I'm not being recognized by the powers that be within this context. Now, I'm going to still be strategic and intentional and still, try get research awards and grants so I can, but as far as accolades and, I mean, at this point, and so Beyonce and Taylor Swift are very interesting themselves because they maintain just, very, if not warm, at least kind of collegial dynamic in their interactions, their public facing interactions, unlike Mariah Carey and J-Lo, Jennifer Lopez, where Mariah Carey is famously asked about J-Lo and she says, "Who's that?" I mean, but there's reasons for that. But at this point, in a very real sense, both of these women are positioned in ways that are larger than life and that are far bigger than the two of them as individual human beings. That's my take on it, but I'll let Sister Tria go. I could go on all day about that.
Two things. One, I think we're socialized to protect white women in this country, everyone. For marginalized people, because a white woman that cries typically means some kind of death or loss for us, whether that be financial, social, or psychological, or, even freedom. Freedom or death. So that's the first thing, I think. And the second thing is Black women are never allowed to be mediocre. We always have to, regardless of the area that you work in, you have to be twice as good. And I know people are like, I don't know if that's necessarily true. Be a Black woman. Be a Black woman with degrees. Be a Black woman who has verified skills and verified success. Now, if she wasn't going up against Taylor Swift, me personally, I'm like, what is this thing called going up against Taylor Swift? They're in two different genres. They make music for two different crowds, all these other things. But Black women are not allowed to be mediocre at all. And I think that everyone in this country knows this, because can you honestly say that this album, even if this album is not your cup of tea, if it's not the genre that you like, and I'm talking primarily about Beyonce's album, what you cannot say is that this woman did not put a lot of thought beyond just, oh, this is a good beat. She was very critical in creating that. So and I'm not going to disparage Taylor Swift either, because quite honestly, I don't care, but I know that she worked hard too. But white women are always protected in this country. That's how we are all socialized. And Black women can never be mediocre. But we will always be torn down, everyone knowing full well that we have done that and then some. I will say this, my mediocre is better than the standard of excellence. And that is any Black woman. Point blank, period.
I want to, first of all, amen, acknowledge that. But I want to go back to the imagery and analogy that you, Dr. Rove, just raised about the plantation house. And the reason for that is the lyrics that have stayed with me since the first time I listened to this album at approximately 30 seconds after it was released, were part of the song, I believe, American Requiem. And I had put them in the chat earlier, but it's goodbye to what has been, a pretty house that we never settled in. And I have been kind of haunted by that phrase since first hearing that song. The funny thing was I posted them as lyrics to my Facebook page right after hearing it and was immediately met with, is everything okay? Like, are you good? And so it was clearly a lyric that touch something in people. There was a message there that was yet to be unraveled. But I think of what you were sharing about the master's house and the potential to read that into that lyric of that being the pretty house that we were never able to settle in, and the fact that she's saying goodbye to it is somewhat telling. But also just the idea of what she's trying to accomplish with this album. Is she trying to claim a space within country music, or is she saying, I don't need to claim this space because it's already mine? And that's making me think of the message of, I think the phrase is, you'll never dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. And so what is she saying in lyrics like that? And with this album overall, is she basically declaring a message of that reclamation without the need for permission? Or is she seeking that space that people are saying that she's trying to claim?
I mean, I think that's a great question. I think she's challenging that she's trying to claim a space in country music when she says this ain't a country album. And I would lean more toward her, like, she's like, it's not a country album. You can't contain it within any kind of genre. Within ethnic studies, for example, ethnic studies has always been an interdisciplinary field, but now it's gone from interdisciplinary to antidisciplinary to transdisciplinary. So it defies really any kind of easy labeling or boxing. And I think, in a sense, what Beyonce is doing with this album is saying, I am beyond genres. Mm-hmm. I'm beyond categorization. I am that I am. And that is an artist. And these are my creations. And they're beyond labels. And so I think in that sense, that harkens to what you're saying, Audre Lorde saying that we cannot dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. I think looking at the lyrics for American Requiem and then recognizing also that this is basically a 3-part project. And Act 1 was Renaissance, that talks about, there is a refrain, I forget the song, is my un-American life. I mean, my un-American life, right? Is that because she is, to me, a Black woman who has defied so many odds. And then going from my un-American life, because un-American in the sense that we were never intended to thrive within this society. We weren't even intended to even be a part of the society. We were legally codified as property. So anything that we do, in a sense, is un-American, right? I mean, she's going, right? She's going all the way back to the way that this entire system was set up. And when I think about that lyric from American Requiem, and then I also think about a lot of the lyrical content from Act One, which is Renaissance, I do lean more towards her going beyond genres, going beyond categorizations, going beyond limitations and barriers. And I also think about even the White House itself being built by Black enslaved bodies, and us not even, and I think about the audacity of the country to elect a Black man president not once but twice, and that Black people built the White House, but we were never, ever, ever, ever supposed to take up residence in it. And it takes me back to what Sister Tria was sharing about this student at Indiana. Oh, God, Indiana's the deep South. Indiana sounds like Alabama. But Mike Pence comes out of Indiana. But like what she was saying in a very kind of garbled, inarticulate way was that it was really expressing that. It's like, yeah, you picked the cotton, but you didn't make the money. You were just the property. You were just the commodity. You were just the means to an end. And so I think Beyonce is going beyond all of transcending and transgressing. The transcendence is in the transgression of all of these constructed, contrived labels, to me.
Dr. Tria, one of the other narratives that's come out of this album has been, I think the narrative has been continued into when Beyonce just recently, I don't know if it was earlier this week or maybe sometime last week or over the weekend, but shared the video of her hair care routine. And it was seen by some as responsive to the claim that, she probably had either raggedy hair or that Black women don't have long hair, or all of these different things. And at one point, I think during the video, she makes the statement that, what she's doing it's her business. Or it's nobody else's business, and she doesn't really care what other people are thinking or saying, even though she's also, for the first time in a long time for some, having that more personalized conversation with her audience and with the broader public. So I think the question for me is, because you both spoke a lot about what she was doing and the reclamation that she's doing with this album, and the sense of belonging for herself that she's establishing outside of the narrative and kind of beyond the narrative. I'm wondering just about, what your thoughts are on what she's doing there. Should she be speaking to those audiences? Should she be seeking awards or participating in these different award shows and seeking that level of acclaim, when she's also declaring very boldly in this sort of album, I transcend your awards, I transcend your categorizations of what I'm doing, even as she's spelling out that story for them. So I think it's a two-part question for me. A, is that the work that she should be doing, or should her focus be elsewhere? And B, culturally, is that the work that we should be doing because of the frequent attempts that we have to make as a culture, as Black culture in this country, to both define who we are and who we're not, claim our space within this country, while also saying that it belongs to us already. We don't need that permission to occupy the spaces or the places that we're in, but we also have to rely on systems that will acknowledge those spaces as well. So what is kind of the middle line, or what should we be doing instead if that's the wrong approach?
Kara, Doing these complex questions late at night. Okay. So in terms of like the hair, whatever, I'm like, if people found out that Black people can grow hair, okay. To me, I was like, sacred. Do I want to get that for my baby? Right? That's literally the only thing that I was thinking about that video, because I have worked so hard um in my 40s to experience life outside of the white gaze.
Mm.
And I wish that for every person of color, as you start to decolonize your mind, sometimes a banana is just a banana. Sometimes a commercial for sacred is just a commercial for sacred. Now, to this idea of like, what's the middle ground, or should we be doing this work? I don't know. I honestly don't know. But I will tell you this: anything that tires me out, I'm not interested in. So I'm not interested in doing the work of like educating people about the Black experience when there are so many asynchronous tools that you can use, like Google and books and other things that you can read. And so I think that really what I want for Black people is for us to be our authentic selves, and to move beyond, like, so to imagine that the Grammys are the height of the measure of success in this country. Okay, that's fine. But I would be more concerned about what does it look like for me to get an NAACP award? Because these are my people. When I go to present, I'm not like, oh, I wonder if the American Sociological Association is going to give me an award for this work. Really, my responsibility is to the other Black scholars in that room and to our ancestors who have passed on. Am I forwarding and am I advancing their work in ways that allow future generations a jumping off or a launch pad, right? Or am I making it so hard that they have to get it out the mud? That's my area of the vineyard. But NAACP awards, the Soul Train awards, that's really where I'm putting my ilk in. Because if you can actually like think through and get awarded one of those awards, what your community is saying is we're behind you. We agree that this is a seminal work in ways that Grammys and majority culture have never, ever understood Black cultural products. For them, it is a capitalist venture. For us, it is life. And therein is the difference. And so if you'll just allow me, if I go back to your quote from the previous question, goodbye to what has been, pretty house that we never settled in. To me, I'm like, this American dream we keep pushing off on people, when has it ever been the dream for Black communities? Between redlining practices and discrimination and all those other things, that we have been able to mark out a semblance of an existence outside of what these majority narratives tell us, this is your measure of success. That in and of itself is success. So I don't want to talk about like, oh, I got a house and blah, 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 blah. Tell me how we build a Greenwood. Tell me how we build, I can't remember the community in Florida. It's not Gainesville, but Rosewood. Tell me how we build these self-sustaining communities where we get to be the marker of our success. So to me, this is kind of like, nah, I don't need that. That is not a measure of my success anymore at all. When I'm being my true authentic self, when I'm living outside of the white gaze, the majority and narrative gaze, when I am interrupting and disrupting these narratives about who and what I can be, that's where I want to be. When a community of my peers, my actual community says, Trey, you did a daggone good job. You represented well. This was stellar. That's who I'm interested in hearing from. But not people who are like, actually, I don't care about those people. And the older I get, the less I care about that part. I hope that answered your question.
It does. Thank you. To close this out, I will ask both of you, because you both spoke about this as an album that is an act of decolonization and an act of reclamation, of restoration, of all of these different things that she is doing with and through this album, not only I think for herself, but also for and towards the culture that she is speaking to. So this is another two-part question, but it's not as complicated as that last one was. The first part is, why is that so important for us to recognize that that's what she's doing with this album? And then part two is, what do you think comes next? Because this is the second act of three, I think, that she's promised. So what comes next? And what does that say for the cultural movement that she is in many ways leading through that work?
Can I start with the easy part of this question, which is, I think what I'm hoping comes next is like an Afrofutures project, meaning she is projecting new sounds. And for someone who's like, this doesn't even make sense, think about Missy Elliott in the 90s, who was creating technologies and new synthesizers. Like anyone who saw Renaissance, the not the movie, but the docu movie, maybe. Mm-hmm. There's a part in there where she says, "Can I get this type of lens?" And the person's like, "That doesn't exist." And so she's like, "Really?" Because I went on Google and it exists. Right. So I think what I'm hoping will happen is that the vision that she sees in her head will blow us into the future. She has done some amazing things around Afrofutures in music itself. So there's a line in one of her songs that says, she changed the world when that digital dropped. She literally changed the ways that people and even music critics critiqued music as a way to kind of steer people where to buy. She was like, I don't need any of that. I'm gonna do it without promo. And she dropped it. And then we see other folks doing like the same thing. And then critics trying to catch up because she's like, I just took out the middleman, essentially. So I'm hoping that that will happen in her next, in whatever iteration, whatever form that takes. That's what I'm hoping. What was this first part of your question, Kara?
I'm trying to remember myself. I think it was just why that act of reclaiming, retelling, and decolonizing that mindset is so important in what she's done with this album.
So going back to Arturo Schomburg from the Schomburg Center, he has this the seminal work, 1925, that says the Negro digs up his past. And part of that is because within the context of this country, we have done so much to erase who we are as a people. Systemically, we're not talking about individuals, we're not talking about institutions. I'm saying systemically, the society has been set up to erase the contributions of Black folks. And I can only talk about Black folks right now, but fill yourself in the blank here. Because that happens, Arturo Schomburg says we have to dig up our past to repair that which was lost in enslavement, right? So this idea of, I don't know where we came from. I know where I came from. My mama's people are from Texas. My daddy's people are from Cuba, right? So there is not a need as an indigenous Black person here in the United States, there is not a need for me to tie my ancestry back to Africa as a way to create an identity here in America. What I am saying is, yes, I recognize I have roots. Here's where those roots may have come from, but my mama is from Texas. My daddy is from Cuba. And when them two got together, they created this right here. My Blackness is experienced within the context of the Southwest. By understanding those things, when I'm digging up my past, it does not necessarily mean digging up the past of like the entirety of Blackness. It is, what are the contributions that Black people made in the state of Arizona? Why do I swim in a swimming pool at the University of Arizona Rec, because at some point when I dug up my history, there were people who could not get degrees in education because they could not swim in the pool to pass their education test. And as homage to them, I will swim every day in that rec pool if that's what it means for them to understand that their labor was not in vain. And because I understand that, it makes me move differently in the world. And I think this is the important part. So if you're from St. Louis, dig up the past of St. Louis. What are the contributions of Black people to your field, to the areas that you're interested in? How does this make us move differently? This way, once we start digging up our past, Arturo Schomburg knew two things. One, that the stuff that we are being told about who we are is absolutely not true. But two, once we learn that stuff, you can't stop me from walking onto this campus like, this is my campus, I belong here. And then making space for other people thereafter, right? So I don't necessarily have to kill someone if I deprive them of who they are. And that is the necessity of reclaiming spaces. That is the necessity of digging up our past. That is the necessity of understanding. No, I will not feel marginalized, and you will not make me feel bad in a country that my people built. Argue with your mom. That would be my answer. This is...
I'm going to be quick. Oh my gosh. So again, I'm going to harken back to the conversation I was having with Sister Tria and keep it real simple. Beyonce could have done anything. I mean, if I had her kind of wealth, I would have been retired and sat down somewhere 20 years ago. And I love that, obviously, I'm sure that she did this collectively. I love that she is using her platform to inspire so many people, like from such a cross section of backgrounds, to read, to do the research, but first and foremost, to be curious, to be inquisitive, to actually want to pursue learning the facts and learning about the truth, not even necessarily because they understand it or need it or recognize it to be this decolonizing project, even though some of them certainly do, but for the sake of the art and for the sake of the process and the journey and the fun of having that child's beginner's mind, of having our curiosity, having our creativity piqued and titillated. It's just in and of itself like that. I'm so glad that she did this project for all of the aforementioned reasons, and also because she really could have done anything. You were referencing sacred. There's a lot of different ways that she can add on to her billionaire status, and she used her platform in a way that is galvanizing and that is absolutely a catalyst for this work. And she's got to reach, like, I do this in my classes, and like Sister Tree, yeah, I'm not educating anybody. I get paid. You pay me and sit in one of my classes. Now, what I would like to see from her next, there's been a lot of speculation. Quite frankly, I would like whatever it is to be her having fun. And what I mean by that is whatever rabbit hole she chooses to go down. I mean, this, Act 1, which was Renaissance, a lot of that was about intersectionally challenging so much of the homophobia and transphobia and erasure of queer Black contributions, even by the Black collective itself, right? In a similar way that Cowboy Carter Act 2 is the critique of the erasure on the part of primarily of whites. What I want to see in Act 3 is her having a really, really good time and inviting us behind the curtain of Beyonce the artist to Beyonce the human being and the person, just like having fun and living her best life, because she's already, I mean, to me, Act One and Act Two are already standalone masterpieces in and of themselves. And so I just want to see her have fun, girl. Take off the cape. I'm just saying, I know she's got a whole team, but she a Virgo, okay? Virgo's groove. Whew. She's a Virgo. I'm just gonna say that. But yeah, have some fun.
Well, thank you both so much again. And as always, this was an amazing conversation. And I hope anyone who tuned in and was able to listen, first of all, if you have not, go out, listen to the album. Second of all, please take the opportunity to share this conversation with your networks, with your community, and join us in learning from it and the other conversations that we have as part of this series. Every conversation is an important one that is giving you unique entry into different aspects of the lived Black experience, the stories that we tell, the identities that we claim and reclaim, and the narratives that are important to understanding who we are, how we are, and why we are, and the persistence in that existence. So we thank you for joining us. We thank Dr. Rofe and Dr. Allen for once again gracing us with your presence and your wisdom and insights. And we can't wait to have you both back and to have our audience join us again next time. Until then, as we always say, go with grace.